There's been two ridiculous updates in the Las Vegas shooting story. One, there was apparently a laptop with a missing hard drive found in the shooter's hotel room, and the hard drive was removed by the shooter after the mass shooting, but before the shooter killed himself. And two, Jesus Campos, the most important witness of the entire investigation, went to Mexico right after the shooting. That's why it was gone for like 5 days. Starting with that first story from the Washington Post, the Vegas shooter's laptop was missing a hard drive. A federal official says a laptop found in the Las Vegas shooter's hotel suite after the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history was missing a hard drive. The official says Wednesday that investigators believe gunman Stephen Paddock removed the hard drive from the laptop before taking his own life after he opened fire on a crowd at a country music festival. The official said the hard drive hasn't been found. The official wasn't authorized to speak on the subject publicly and spoke to the Associated Press on the condition of anonymity. So the guy who's dead on the floor spends the last 120 seconds or so of his life, after killing a bunch of people, disposing of a hard drive without a trace. That makes a lot of sense. How do they know that the hard drive was taken after the shooting before the guy allegedly killed himself? Is there a time code on the laptop? Because if this is true, and yet they still can't find it, then that's quite a magic trick that dead Houdini on the ground pulled on these investigators in a matter of a couple of minutes. What did he do with it? Did he put it in the walls? Put it in the air vent? Did he throw it out the window? Did he vaporize it? Did he, blast it up into outer space, transport it? Maybe he shoved it up his ass? Or maybe the person who killed the person on the ground took it on their way out. But that's conspiratorial talk right there. It's a lot more reasonable to think that the dead man disposed of the hard drive. Another question that comes to mind is, why would someone who's about to kill himself care about having this hard drive? Well, they say he was going to try and escape before. If that's true, and really, you can't really believe anything they say, but if we assume for a moment that that's true, then it would make sense that before he rocket-manned himself out of the window with a parachute or an Iron Man suit or whatever else he had in there, he would want to get rid of whatever information that might enable authorities to track him. I want to point out again, like we did on an episode of the Propaganda Report, that his father was a master of disguise. His father escaped prison and was on the FBI's most wanted list for nearly a decade, almost longer than anybody else has ever been on it. He went and moved to a town in Oregon where he changed his name, changed his appearance, and lived a very public and social life where he was liked by many of the people in the town, and authorities didn't get wind of him. He even opened a business. The guy is a con artist. He was his entire life. His children seem to have learned from him. The brother clearly seemed to be lying in his conflicting stories he told when being interviewed after the shooting. Another brother was arrested on child pornography charges at an assisted living community that he lives at. I guess he was foregoing bingo night to look at some perverted pictures. The fact is that this family learned crime from their father. Their father was a confidence man. This son, who allegedly committed this crime, looks like he might have picked up a few deception techniques from dear old dad. What better way to get away with something than convincing people that you're dead? The next revealing piece of information we learned was that Jesus Campos, the most important witness in the entire story, went to Mexico right after the shooting. He was shot in the leg. He was the guy closest to Paddock, called a hero. Details of his story fuzzy. He just goes off to Mexico. A road trip at that. Drove to Mexico is the story. Now again, these are all anonymous sources coming from Fox News and the New York Times, so all of this stuff could change tomorrow. But he did go missing for like 5 days. Then he randomly showed up on the Ellen Show. Now what's he doing going to Mexico? Now that we know this new information, that Campos went to Mexico immediately after the shooting, and that there was a hard drive missing from a laptop that was found inside Paddock's hotel room that they believe Paddock took out of the computer after the shooting before he killed himself. Now that we know these things, let's plug this information into the official story, the story that they would have the public believe, and see what kind of picture emerges. Okay, here's the story we're being told. Stephen Paddock unleashed 12 minutes of terror onto concertgoers below from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, stopping only briefly to fire 200 rounds through the door at an unarmed security guard named Jesus Campos, who was walking away from Paddock's hotel room door. Campos didn't even realize that gunfire was going off inside of that hotel room that he was just standing next to, because he mistook it for the sounds of drilling. It wasn't until right before a bullet entered his leg that he realized gunfire was even going off. He then took cover, and fortunately for him, only one of the over 200 bullets fired at him through the door hit. Meanwhile, back inside the hotel room, Paddock turns his attention back to the crowd below and continues firing upon them again. After the 12 minutes are over, Paddock goes over to his laptop, removes a hard drive, does only God knows what with it, then picks up a revolver and kills himself. Campos is still out in the hallway. The engineer, who was called to the floor, never quite made it as close to Campos did because Campos told him to get back. So what we have is Jesus Campos in the hallway, a dead Stephen Paddock, this is a story anyway, on the floor in the hotel room, and a hard drive. And then shortly after the shooting, Jesus Campos fled to Mexico for 4 or 5 days. That's the basic gist of the story that they would have us believe right now. That's an insane story. At what point in time can you suggest that maybe Jesus Campos isn't who they say he is, or that maybe he knows a little bit more than they say he knows without being called a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist? Maybe the investigators should go look for that hard drive down in Mexico. Or perhaps they could take a trip over to the Ellen DeGeneres show and see if it fell in between the couch cushions when Jesus Campos was sitting on it. And Campos isn't the only one with a little bit of mystery surrounding him, as we all know. Stephen Paddock, pretty mysterious guy himself. We don't even know if that's his body on the ground that's pictured in that leaked photo. They didn't tell us how they identified the body. Lombardo kept saying suspect instead of saying Paddock during almost all the press conferences. We have no idea, and I don't think a lot of them have any idea either. And we certainly have no idea who Jesus Campos is. He could have been an undercover federal agent for all we know, or he could have been involved in some other way. This whole official narrative is beyond bogus, way too intentionally confusing, which is probably part of the whole point. It's very hard not to come to the conclusion that they're just trying to confuse us, trying to bewilder us, because nothing makes sense. Why in the world would an unnamed source who isn't authorized to leak information leak this information to the Associated Press? Information enticing enough to engage people, yet vague enough to really just confuse everybody. What is that, a cliffhanger? Is this an episode of The X-Files? Did this transfer of information occur in a dark parking deck in Washington, D.C.? And just before the informant was about to give the most revealing information, the smoking man showed up and he had to get the hell out of there? I mean, this is ridiculous. I said it once and I'll say it again. The answer to this case lies within Jesus Campos, if that's even his real name.